as co-chair of the JCRC of Greater Washington's Northern Virginia Commission. Thanks for joining us for the third in our four-part Virginia Advocacy series. In addition to our legislative kickoff, where we heard from Speaker of the House Eileen Phillicorn and Majority Leader Dick Sassler of the Senate, we also learned about environmental initiatives pending before the General Assembly this year. And tonight, we will learn about legislation that will address the housing needs of Virginia's most vulnerable populations. We will have our final event of this series in January, which will cover criminal justice reform. Following that, we invite you to join us on February 3rd for Virtual Advocacy Day. More details to come, but as in past years, we expect to hear from the governor and other top officials, then have an opportunity to collectively share our priorities with members of the General Assembly. In these ways and others, the JCRC serves as the public affairs and community relations arm of the organized Jewish community. Around the region, we represent more than 100 organizations and synagogues as we advocate for the needs, priorities, and values of the Jewish community, which include advocating for the well-being of everyone in the Greater Washington area. I want to thank the sponsors for this year's Virginia Legislative Series, including Cookieheimer Blitz and Ellen Blaylock. And thank you also to the other donors who have supported our work. If you would like to join them, you can do so by going to our website, jcouncil.org, or clicking through on the invitation you received for tonight's event. A copy of our legislative priorities for the year, as Vicki mentioned, it has been posted in the chat. And you'll see that the first on this list of priorities is fighting poverty and COVID-19 relief. As it states, COVID-19 exposed and exacerbated weaknesses in our ability to provide for those most in need in our communities. The JCRC supports and advocates for measures that provide direct relief, as well as those that strengthen our infrastructure for providing basic necessities to the most vulnerable in our communities. We support programs that help our impoverished neighbors acquire the tools to success by providing access to affordable housing, hunger relief, and quality education. Specifically, tonight we're here to discuss housing initiatives. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Christie Marra is a family and housing law attorney with the Virginia Poverty Law Center and a member of the steering committee of the Campaign to Reduce Evictions. Ms. Marra graduated from UVA in 1988. She earned her law degree from the University of Richmond in 1991. She began her legal career working with a legal aid program in the coal fields of Southwest Virginia. She was hired by the Central Virginia Legal Aid Society in Richmond, where she worked for 13 years as a family and housing law attorney for the urban poor in the Richmond area. In 2004, she joined the Virginia Poverty Law Center, which provides legal aid training and public policy advocacy. Thank you, Christie, for joining us tonight, and I now will turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Vicki, for having me, and thank you to all of you for the work that you do and your advocacy. I took a quick look at the advocacy agenda that your organization has, and it is really ambitious and really wonderful. So a lot of the things that you have on your advocacy agenda, the legal aid community has on ours. So I wish you lots of good conversations with your legislators up there. Just to say a little bit about the Virginia Poverty Law Center, in case any of you aren't familiar with us, we are a statewide organization based in Richmond. We are a legal aid organization, and we provide support to the 9 other regional legal aid programs across the state. 2 of them are here in Northern Virginia, Legal Services of Northern Virginia, and the Legal Aid Justice Center, which has a focus on immigrants' rights here in Virginia. We are also the arm of legal aid, along with Legal Aid Justice Center, that does the policy work, and our focus is primarily on state policy. So we cover, in addition to the housing priorities that I'm going to go over tonight, we also do work in the field of hunger, food access, in the field of consumer rights, healthcare, and family and domestic violence. So, and other public benefits as well. So there are other folks who do that. And I am very lucky because I get to work on the housing issues and primarily the rental housing issues. I've been working particularly on those issues from a policy perspective at the Poverty Law Center for the past decade. And Bob mentioned that I had been a local legal aid attorney in Richmond and the surrounding counties for 13 years. And I'll tell you, when I started back in 1991, 92, I guess, in that office, one of the very first things that you learn to do as a legal aid attorney was to handle housing cases for tenants who were facing eviction, especially those who were being put out of their homes unlawfully. So you'll notice one of the measures that we're working on in the next session is dealing with these unlawful evictions, which are still happening and which actually became more prevalent during COVID. But before I talk about the ways that COVID changed what we see in people's struggle to find decent, affordable housing throughout the state, I just want to underscore, and I think the fact that, you know, we were seeing these problems as far back as 1992 really highlights that housing, in my experience in this state, rental housing and homeownership have been tough to come by for a lot of groups in this state. And so somebody asked me earlier today, I think it was a reporter, maybe yesterday, what I thought when back in 2018, as you all know, Matthew Desmond at Princeton came out with the results of his study of eviction rates across the country, and 5 of the cities in Richmond were on the the naughty list for the 10 large cities with the highest eviction rates in the country. 3 of our mid-sized cities were on that same top 10, really a bottom 10 for mid-sized cities in the country. And so I've been asked many times, were we, not just me, but all the legal aid attorneys, surprised by that? And the answer was no. We have known for a long time that eviction rates in the state of Virginia are unacceptably high, and that there are other significant problems with inequitable housing, lack of affordable housing, and poor conditions in housing that is affordable, quote unquote. So these issues are not new. Fast forward to March in the past 10 months, and again, and I think Bob alluded to this, COVID did not create any of the problems we're seeing in housing, in the eviction rates right now, but the pandemic certainly exacerbated the impact of these problems. So our eviction rates have been high. In fact, if you look closely at the data, eviction rates, according to court data, since the pandemic started, are actually lower than they were 2 years ago, and in some cases 1 year ago. And that's because of different protections that exist. But the impact of being evicted has never been so terrifying. Not only are you and your family facing, the cold and the rain and the lack of safety, but now you're facing a disease that you can only really stay safe from if you shelter. So I think the other thing that COVID has done, in addition to making the impact more severe, I think it has continued to shine a light on our housing crisis. And that light has, because we've also been really reawakened to the racial inequities in our state and in the country, I think that the light is shining brighter on the racial inequities in the area of access to affordable and secure housing. So that is sort of by way of background, and hopefully will explain why we're choosing to move forward with the 5 legislative items that we are supporting in the housing area in January, next month, in January and February, because they're not really tightly focused on COVID. We did some tightly focused bills back during the special session. These are things that really try to get at the underlying systemic problems that cause people to struggle to find and maintain affordable rental housing in Virginia. So, okay, I will go ahead and start going down this list. I hope that if anybody has questions, either about the little background that I just gave, or about the any of the things that I'm going to talk about now, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. Vicki will keep an eye on them. I am more than happy to answer questions as I go along.
Christie, I'm going to interrupt with a question.
Yes.
Talking about the impact from the evictions being greater now, how much of that is that the extended safety net from family is less, maybe because people are less willing to take people in, or because that family that you might have relied on is also facing the same things more often than they would have been before COVID?
I think that's a great point, Vicki. And I think that added to those reasons for people being hesitant to take family members in is the fact that people can still get evicted for having unauthorized guests in their home. That was something we really tried extremely hard to get included in what people are calling the eviction moratorium. And we were not successful with that. So yes, that is another part of this, is that there's nowhere to go, right? So I think one of the reasons the impact is so great is what you and I are talking about, the inability to go shelter with friends and relatives, or the lessened ability to do that, but also the lessened capacity of the actual homeless shelters. Because of social distancing requirements, their actual capacity is cut, at least I would say, in half, right? If not more so. And so the safety net has really been stretched to the point where there are big holes in it. So yeah, that's a really good point.
And one more question is in the chat before you move on to the specific legislative issues. Is the eviction rate very different in different areas of the state?
Yes.
And the higher rental rates in Northern Virginia, does that contribute to higher eviction rates?
No, it's really interesting. It's actually, and we're still looking largely at the data for years prior to 2020, even though we look at I think we get weekly data, or maybe monthly data of what's happening now in terms of the court filings. It's not packaged for 2020, so this is pre-pandemic. But what I can tell you is that the data showed that Northern Virginia's eviction rates were lower than anywhere else in the state. That doesn't mean that there are fewer people getting evicted, because you all have more people up there. So the number of people may even be greater, but the eviction rate is lower. The eviction rates in Richmond and Petersburg and Hopewell and Hampton, Norfolk, Newport News, they are consistently high, well above the 5-6% that is the statewide average. Bringing down that, balancing out that average, in addition to the low rates in Northern Virginia, are historically low rates in Southwest Virginia, which it's really odd, right? Northern Virginia, fairly wealthy place, although there are plenty of people who are financially struggling there and facing eviction. But this is just a sort of a guess as to why your eviction rates are lower, is that there are some more resources there than in other parts of the state, like Richmond and Hampton Roads. And collectively, there seems to be the societal and political will to take some of those resources, a fair amount of those resources, and put them toward providing better housing opportunities for people. I know Arlington, for example, has its own, or had for a while, its own voucher program. I know that there are a number of localities up in Northern Virginia that have their own affordable housing trust funds. I know that, there have been different creative things that you all have done. There, the Arlington Landlord-Tenant Partnership was a creative way to get landlords to take those Section 8 vouchers that other places, up until we got source of income protection in July, really people were struggling to find good landlords to take those in other places. So I think that explains a little bit why we have these vastly different rates. There's another explanation I won't get into right now, but it is very much a racial justice, or in this case, racial injustice explanation that I think explains at least part of why we see our highest eviction rates where we see them.
Great.
Other questions before I go on to the specific proposals?
I think you're good. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Go ahead and take us down the list.
Great. And you have the list because Vicki put it in the chat. And by and large, I would say that they are in, I guess, order of priorities. So, and this is a lot of legalese, and I'll try to explain it as in layman's terms. But right now, the first, you'll see that number 1 talks about something called right of redemption and post-payment notice. And what we're trying to do with this is make sure that people who pay all of the money they owe to their landlord get to stay in their home, right? No matter when they pay it, basically. Not really no matter when, but right now, if I am late on my rent, I get a notice saying, you're late on your rent, Christie, you owe this much rent, this much late fees, and I may be going to different places trying to get that money together, and it may be that I don't have it together by the court date, and there's a judgment entered against me that will allow my landlord to evict me. But it may be that I get it all together, everything I owe, including whatever my landlord paid to take me to court, whatever my landlord paid to get the sheriff scheduled to evict me. But if I can pay him back all of that, plus the rent, plus the late fees, at least 2 business days before the sheriff comes to evict me, I won't get evicted. And that, to me anyway, seems fair. Landlord is made whole, so I get to stay in my home. The problem is that tenants only have a right to do that once every 12 months. So clearly most people don't need to do that more often than once every 12 months, but particularly in a situation like this or similar unexpected crises, you don't know what's going to happen. And there may be a second month in that lease where you need extra time to get that money together. And the way the law is now, it's entirely up to your landlord whether he gives you that extra time if you have to pay that late like that twice. So what this bill would do is it would get rid of that limit, and it would say, look, as long as a tenant is paying everything that is owed to the landlord and making the landlord completely whole, and they do it at least 2 days before the sheriff comes to evict them, they should be able to stay. The other thing it does is it provides additional notification to tenants that if they don't pay everything they owe, they're still going to get evicted. We run into this a lot where tenants, for various legitimate reasons, don't understand that if they make a payment to the landlord of half the rent or all the rent, but they don't pay the late fees or the court costs, they can still get evicted. And that's a big problem, because if I only have a certain amount of money and I think, well, if I pay my landlord this money, I'll get to stay and I'll get a couple extra weeks to pay the rest of it, I'm gonna do that. But if I know that even if I give all this money to my landlord, I'm still gonna get evicted in a week or two, I'm probably gonna move out on my own and find another place to stay. So we think all of that is really important. Are there any questions about that legislation? This is being carried by Delegate Sia Price, who represents Newport News.
So nobody is putting anything in the chat. If anybody wants to do so, you can, or keep going. Oh, wait, here we go. What are the prospects for the state to take action before January 1 in the absence of federal renewal of the eviction moratorium? And are there any chances that that will happen? If not, what can and should we do to help?
Great. So nothing is going to change before January 1st. One thing that we tried very hard to do back in the spring, and you may remember this, and I think you may have even been involved in this advocacy, we tried to get Governor Northam to issue an executive order declaring a statewide eviction moratorium. He refused to do that. He refused to do it repeatedly. And so nothing will happen in terms of state action until the General Assembly starts rolling on January 13th. Somebody put something in the chat about the extension. So I don't think that's final yet. For properties under Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, right? It gets very confusing. So HUD can issue an extension, as you know. HUD can issue a moratorium on evictions for property that is financed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, right? That's secured by them. And it looks like they may have done that through January 31st. We are also hearing that there's a fairly good chance that the negotiators in Congress will come out with a final package that includes some further eviction. My understanding was some further eviction moratorium until January 31st. It may just be Fannie and Freddie properties. And that may be what you're hearing about rather than another HUD guidance or order. I haven't seen anything new come from HUD. I'd be surprised, honestly, if anything new came from HUD at this stage in this lame duck administration. I think what you're hearing about is more likely the same thing I heard last night, which is part of this package that leadership is working on in Congress will include an extension of the eviction moratorium until the end of January. We are hopeful that that will also include some significant amount of rental assistance. The Governor Northam today announced his budget. He makes amendments. We're in the middle of a 2-year budget going into, the budget that they'll be working on in January will be kind of the middle of this budget that we're in. And the governor has added $15.7 million in rental assistance for the rest of this year of the budget, which goes until next June, and then another $25 million in rental assistance for the second year, which starts in July, which is a nice gesture, but it's not going to get us very far. So we're all keeping our fingers crossed that there will be good news coming out of Washington. If not, then I am working on trying to get legislators to put in amendments to the state budget for another $200 million in rental assistance. So, because we do need that. So, but nothing will actually be finalized by the state until, the session ends.
Can you just take a moment, because I think some of our participants tonight are very well versed in the subject matter and maybe some a little bit less so. Could you take just a moment to talk about, which I hear a lot about moratorium, and then there's rental relief, and that may seem obvious, sort of what are the distinctions between those and the different impacts they have, but I'm not sure that it is. And then also maybe a moment on the impact of a federal moratorium versus a state moratorium. I think those two concepts would be helpful to flesh out a little bit.
Absolutely, Vicki, and I will do my best. It is super complicated. It has been super complicated. I have been really worried about tenants just because things are changing so rapidly, and they've been like that since the middle of March. So I will do my best to explain sort of where we are now and where I think we're going. We have, what is today, the 16th? I can't do math really well, but I think that means we have 15 days left on the Center for Disease Control eviction moratorium that was issued back in September. That again, it's not a complete moratorium. It only applies to people facing eviction for non-payment of rent. I see people nodding, so you know this. It is only triggered if the tenant signs a declaration under penalty of perjury saying that they earn less than $99,000 a year, that they had a loss of income, or an increased medical bill, and that as a result, they're unable to pay their rent, even though they've been trying and they've been applying for rental assistance. So all that is in the declaration. There's a form online. Various people have put different affidavits together about that. And the CDC has a form. You sign, tenant signs the form, gives the form to the landlord. The landlord is supposed to stop, not do anything more. Different landlords are doing different things there. And that's why I always encourage people to call our eviction legal helpline or their local legal aid, because the legal aid attorneys have been successful in a lot of places in explaining to the judges what the CDC moratorium means. So that, however, expires on December 31st. Then as of January, we have some state protections right now too, but the big protection is the CDC moratorium. Beginning January 1st, unless Congress extends the CDC moratorium or takes some other action, all we have are the protections put into place in the budget that was signed in November by Governor Northam. And those protections, basically, the tenant is entitled to get a notice, which we call a pay or quit notice, that now gives them 14 days to pay what they owe, or the notice also has to tell them you can apply for rental assistance, and you can apply through the state program. Here's that information, or you can call 211 Virginia and see if there are some local programs available. And the landlord is also supposed to apply on behalf of the tenant for this rental assistance, unless the tenant says, no, I've got this, I can apply. And as long as the application is approved within 45 days of when it's submitted, nobody gets evicted. That tenant will not get evicted. So that's where we are now. The problem with that is if the money runs out, those protections go away. Those protections are premised on there being sufficient rental assistance. And I don't want to scare anybody. We've got essentially access to 85 million in rental assistance, even if there's no money coming from the feds, even not counting the extra 25 million the governor's proposing. But we've spent about 85 million in rental assistance since June 29th. And so we, really all need to keep our fingers crossed and send good vibes to the Capitol that they get this money in the final bill. Okay, so that was the first thing on your list. The second item is very important, and it's I've been talking about this notice that tenants get when they fall behind on their rent, and it's called a pay or quit notice. And up until November, you got what was called you got a 5-day pay or quit notice. So if I didn't pay my rent, let's say I had a grace period, I had until the 5th to pay my rent. If I couldn't pay my rent, I get a notice on the 6th saying, if you don't pay your rent by the 11th, I'm going to terminate your lease on the 12th and take you to court. And there are landlords, mostly the larger landlords, who are highly, everything they do is done through a computer system. It gets computer generated. But there are a lot of these larger landlords who just automatically, if you had, they send that 5-day pay or quit notice on the 6th, and they file that unlawful detainer case, which is what an eviction case is called, because Virginia is archaic in a lot of ways. And they file that on the, whatever, my math is terrible, but on the 12th. So it doesn't give you a heck of a lot of time, right? Let's say you get paid every 2 weeks, and there was some extra expense that you had at the beginning of the month. And you're not getting, you get this pay or quit notice on the 6th, you're not getting paid again by the time the money is drop dead due on the 10th, right? Not very helpful. Well, in the special session, they extended that time period to 14 days, which I think will be much more helpful. And in addition to extending it to 14 days, they also told the larger landlords who have more than 4 rental units, they must offer tenants who fall behind on their rent a payment plan before they take them to court. Now that law with those 2 provisions expires on July 1st of 2021, but Delegate Price, who's the patron, she is putting in a bill to make it permanent, to take away the sunset clause, so to get rid of the expiration. So I think that's a really important bill. Does anybody have questions about that one? Okay, that's pretty.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes. Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about how the payment plan works, what the timing is?
Yes, great question. So the payment plan must give the tenant 6 months to pay, so that whatever that month's rent is, or until the end of the lease. So if the lease, whichever is shorter. So if the lease ends in 4 months, they only get 4 months to pay it off. If it ends in 6 months, in 5 months, they get 5 months, 6 months, 6 months. But the longest they get is 6 months, and the payments are due in equal installments, and they cannot be charged any late fees. And if they are late on a payment under that payment plan, the landlord can take action to evict them, but he has to give them a new 14-day notice. So under that circumstance, they're not going to get a right to enter into another payment plan, because you only get that once every 12 months. But they will get that notice that gives them 14 days to pay the rest of whatever that balance was. So this, we think, is really helpful for people who just have that one extra expense on a given month, and they just need help with that 1 month, or people who have applied for rental assistance and the application hasn't been approved yet, and so they need to stretch that monthly payment out over 6 months, so that maybe they only have one small payment to make before they get the rental assistance. Did that answer your question?
Yes, and is Adam Eben the sponsor of this one?
Adam Eben was the sponsor of the original bill, and we worked very closely with him. He is not, my understanding from talking to his office is he's not putting in this bill to remove the sunset clause. But I can tell you, I'm hearing from Delegate Price, who is the patron of the bill to take off the sunset clause and patron the original bill with Senator Eben. She is telling me that David Bulova, who is the chair of the committee it will go to, and the speaker are both very supportive of making this a permanent policy. So I feel good about that. And certainly if you all think this is important, it's certainly something. It sounds like you have a good relationship with the speaker. I think somebody mentioned she was here to talk to you previously. Certainly if you think this is a good idea, it would be, or any of these, it would be great for you to share that with her. Okay, going on to the third thing, which is a bill that's being sponsored by Senator Eben, as well as Delegate Hudson from Charlottesville. And this bill strengthens the protections against unlawful evictions. And I don't know how often you all see this in Northern Virginia, but it seems all over the state, our legal aid attorneys represent tenants who are evicted from their homes without being given the opportunity to go to court at all, without getting any notice at all. How do they do that? Well, the landlords will change the lock to their main door to their home. We had a landlord take the windows off the mobile home somebody was renting to force them out. We have had numerous landlords turn off the water or turn off the electricity to force people out of their homes. Really scary incident happened during the early on in the pandemic. Gentleman who rented a room in a rooming house had been there for, I think, seven or 8 months. So he was covered as a tenant under Virginia law, because you have to be there 3 months to be a tenant. And the landlord cut off, oh no, this man wasn't in a rooming house, I'm sorry. He was just renting his own home, renting a home, and the landlord cut off the power this man had some type of respiratory illness and used a nebula, a breathing machine. Couldn't use it because he had no power. So it was actually a life-threatening situation. And our attorney contacted the landlord, explained what the law was, told him he was taking him to court the next day. And so the next day the power got turned back on. But if that tenant hadn't gotten in touch with an attorney, it's really scary what might have happened. So clearly, a couple of things are going on here. There's no real penalty for landlords who take the law into their own hands. The tenant can take them to court, but what happens if the tenant wins is the judge says, okay, landlord, let him back in, do it the right way, and you have to reimburse the tenant for the, whatever it is, $65 he paid to file this case, and any other, quote, actual damages. That's really hard. You get kicked out of your place with no notice. Maybe you go stay on a friend's couch for a few nights until it's resolved. But most of the people that we hear about this happening to don't even have the resources to pay for a hotel room for a few nights. So they are staying wherever they can, maybe, perhaps even in a shelter. And that's not quantifiable in dollars. And so the landlord ends up paying almost nothing and just being told to do it the right way. Clearly that is not discouraging them from taking the law into their own hands. And so Senator Ebbins' bill will allow tenants who are unlawfully evicted to get what we call statutory damages of thousands of dollars. I mean, right now, the bill is drafted having a damages provision of $10,000. It may be less by the time we finish, but we expect it to be 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, by the time we finish. Still a hefty penalty. And the other thing that this bill does is it makes sure that these cases are heard within 5 days of when they're filed. It's amazing, and not in a good way, but we are hearing of judges all over the state who are making people who have been locked out of their homes unlawfully wait weeks and weeks to get a hearing, to get a court date. So he's trying to fix both those things. Any questions on that? No, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, the next bill is one that Delegate Tran and Senator Bell, who you all may also know, they're up your way, actually contacted me about. Delegate Tran contacted me. This deals with military personnel not being able to access the rental housing that they want. And without going, lots of different moving pieces on this, but we think one of the biggest problems is that landlords will require military personnel to waive their federal rights when they sign a lease. They have rights under something called the Service Members Civil Relief Act that basically prevents people like landlords and other creditors from getting a judgment against the service member when the service member is deployed somewhere else. And so it's very, very, very common for leases to include a provision that says, I am waiving all of my rights under the Service Member Civil Relief Act. And if you won't sign a lease, if you don't want to sign the lease with that provision in it, you don't get that apartment or you don't get that house. And it's a pretty somewhat complicated legal issue in that you can waive your rights, but you shouldn't waive them until there's an actual case in court, right? Signing it at the beginning of a lease, there's no case in court. You don't even know whether you want to sign away your rights. So that is another bill that we are strongly supporting. And then the final one is COVID related. I was hearing from quite a few tenants, especially early on in the pandemic, who were very concerned about their landlords bringing strangers into their home. And this was primarily to show the home to prospective tenants, to show the home to maybe they were going to sell it to a prospective purchaser. And the larger landlords figured this out right away. They said, well, we'll just take a video. We'll take a video of the unit, and that's what we'll show to prospective tenants and purchasers. But a lot of the smaller landlords didn't want to do that. And it's really quite frightening and dangerous for people who are vulnerable to this disease to have strangers come in their home. And so we are working with Delegate Carr in Richmond, and actually met with David Bulova about this also just the other day, just last week, and he's also seems quite supportive of this for the state of emergency. So this is only during the pandemic. There will be some additional protections for tenants in those circumstances, some additional time to let them know ahead of time what's happening, get their consent, make other arrangements if they're not comfortable. And then we are, the other things on our agenda would be adding more money to the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, which I'm sure you all are familiar with. And then we also are working with Delegate Krizik, who's just delightful, and he has been a wonderful champion of laws to try to improve the rights of people living in manufactured home communities. And I know there are quite a few along Route 1 up in Northern Virginia, as well as in other areas. And we are working with a group called I'm actually on the board, the Manufactured Home Community Coalition of Virginia. And one of the goals of that group is to try to be a resource for manufactured home park residents, but also help to maintain those parks, help to pass policies to improve the parks, ultimately get to a point where we can have some resident-owned parks in Virginia, and that's really exciting. And so this is just our budget amendment or rather Delegate Krizik's budget amendment is just a preliminary step that would require the state to put together a database showing all the mobile home parks in the state and listing some characteristics of them to give nonprofits and others a better idea of the landscape. So what do we have questions? What questions about?
There are a couple in the chat, but let me ask you before I get to those. On the vulnerable tenants during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
is it specifically related to this pandemic and this state of emergency, or are you looking for something that would carry over to future states of emergency?
I would like something that would carry over to future states of emergency. We are working with the realtors, with the Virginia Association of Realtors on this. They're working on language right now to try to get to a point where they're comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. So I don't have the answer to that yet.
You would love it to be more general, yes, but it might end up being more specific. And then the other question that I had is on the budget. I know that the governor came out with his proposed budget today. Did he include in that money for rental relief, additional monies that you're looking at?
Yes, he included. So it's, I want to say 15.7 million more for the Housing Trust Fund, with the expectation that it's going to be used for rental assistance for the rest of the budget year we're in now. So that takes us to the end of June, and then another 25 million for the second year of the biennium, which starts July 1st. Okay. But again, and I applaud him for putting that in and recognizing that there's a need. I suspect that, like all of us, he's keeping his fingers crossed and listening to the whispers of what's going on Capitol Hill right now and thinking, well, hopefully, that money will come. If it doesn't, again, I hope I'll be able to get patrons for budget amendments to add 200 million. I will tell you that I'm hearing, I haven't talked to him directly, but I'm hearing that Delegate Lopez is introducing a budget amendment to add 160 million to the Housing Trust Fund. So we would certainly support that.
And then there's another more general question about all of your priorities. Could you give us a sense of your sense of the likelihood of each of them?
Absolutely. And this is just my initial sense. So I feel, well, let me give you a big picture. We have been working very closely, both during the special session and now, with the Virginia Association of Realtors. They represent the smaller landlords. And so I have a pretty good sense of where we might be able to reach consensus with them. And they're a very important stakeholder in this space. I think we're going to be able to reach consensus with them on the first bill, the right of redemption, and giving better notice regarding when payments are made, late payments are made, of whether or not there's going to be an eviction action still moving forward. Same thing. I feel like we are really close to, I think they'll be either supportive or certainly won't oppose the bill that makes the 14-day pay or quit notice and the payment plan requirement a permanent thing. So I feel good about those two. I feel really good about those two. The rest, I do think that the protections for vulnerable tenants, I feel like we're going to get there. I feel good about that one. The other two are going to be harder. I will tell you, I think in some ways, honestly, I feel pretty good about all of them, but that doesn't, there are groups, I actually have talked to the realtors about the Senator Evans bill too. And as they've always said, they've been real consistent, if people are doing things outside the law, they don't want that happening either. So, but there are other groups that we have not yet had a chance to talk to. And so that's why I'm hesitant to say I feel really good about it, but there's a group called the Virginia Apartment Managers Association that represents the larger, apartment building owners and managers. And I don't expect them to be happy with all of these, but I don't know exactly what they'll say. And it may be that they're comfortable. Thinking about that, I actually think the prohibition on unlawful evictions that Senator Eben is carrying, I think in terms of other stakeholders, I think everyone's going to be okay with that. I don't think anybody wants to stand up and say, yeah, we think people should be going outside the law. So unless we get some real pushback from legislators, which again, I would be surprised. So thinking it through, I feel pretty good about that one too.
Well, and
So
I guess by starting with the $10,000 statutory damages, you left room for conversation.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you don't end up at the 10,000, as you mentioned, you would still expect a penalty that is felt by the landlords, even if it's not draconian.
Correct. That's the goal.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah. And you didn't mention this one, but I would imagine that people will have a hard time arguing against tenants in the military.
I hope so.
Having to waive their rights.
I hope so. The reason I'm more hesitant about that is because this is not the first time we've dealt with this issue. We dealt with it just a few years ago. The Housing Commission looked at it, and I'm working with an attorney. He's a veteran and now a civilian attorney who represents members of the military, service members, and does a lot of representation of service members in housing cases. And he had written the bill that would have taken care of this problem, and there were objections to it in the Housing Commission, so they didn't put it forward. So that's why I hope, you would think everybody would be supportive of that, but
you never know.
You never know. You never know. Yeah.
And there is a comment, Cookieheimer Blitz, one of our relatively recent past presidents, added some commentary agreeing with you on the Delegate Lopez and his support for the Housing Trust Fund, and also noting that the mobile home park issue is a big one in the South County,
right?
For Fairfax County residents.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Up along Route 1, I've been up there to visit some of those parks, and I know that there, a number of the residents are very concerned about the road widening also. So that's another issue. There's a lot going on that people don't realize in mobile home communities. Lots of great potential. So I visited, I think it's called Audubon. Is anybody familiar with that? Lovely. I mean, it's really a lovely community. It's all mobile homes. So I think we have a lot of opportunity to educate the rest of the state in a good way about that.
Well, I'm looking at the time and we have a few more minutes. I don't know if there are more questions. So I think I've covered the ones that were in the chat. If people want to take yourself off mute, you can go ahead and do that and ask a question, or go ahead and put it in the chat. And while I wait for people to do that, I will just do a final thank you, Christie Marra, for joining us. The work that you do is really impressive, and we're glad to be a small part of it.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I think it's really been great to delve a little bit deeper and just, you know, we cover a lot of issues, and so we don't always take the time to learn at this level of detail. So thank you. And I hope everybody who is here today will join us on February 3rd. We expect to be hearing from the governor about the work that we do and the work that he's hoping will get done during the General Assembly. And then we'll have a chance to actually advocate as a community with other Jewish communities in Virginia on some of these bills, as well as others related to our other legislative priorities.
It looked like there was one.
And I do think that there is, in your opinion, what do lawmakers think will happen January 2nd with the eviction filings?
And I assume you mean state lawmakers. So I don't know, but I think that when they spent a lot of time, and the protections that they put in the budget that was signed in November are very, very detailed. And I think that they believe that they have calibrated those, the details of those protections in a way that will prevent evictions for non-payment of rent. I think that I hope that they're right. I know they're only going to be right if we get additional money in the rent and mortgage relief program. The only thing that if we do get money from the federal government in the amount that we're hearing, that's great. What concerns me, and what I don't think lawmakers take into account all the time, is that there are, you know, what I call unprofessional landlords. There are other names for them, who don't follow the law, who just, I was got some information today about a legal aid attorney representing a client where the landlord just said, I'm not going to take your declaration. I'm not going to take it. I'm going to evict you anyway. So if we have people who are going outside the law pre-COVID, right? There's and ignoring the laws that have been there for years, if not decades, we're certainly going to have people who ignore the special protections that are put into place. So, I am worried about that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question. So much of these rights that are granted to tenants depend upon them knowing their rights and having access to the legal aid services that your organization also provides. What are the barriers to that happening? Do you feel like you do a good job of letting people know how to reach you? And I guess, do you have a sense of what portion of the community is out there that's not knowing how to get these services?
Yeah, we're always really worried about the people who don't know how to get the services, the people who can't get through. We have started, you all probably know about this, statewide eviction legal helpline. And that number is 833, and then the words no evict, and I'll go ahead and put it in the chat right now. But you raise a really good point. We don't have enough legal aid attorneys across the state. We're getting more. We actually did get, I think you all know about this, IKEA provided money, and then the governor matched that money to hire, I can't remember how many, maybe 14 new housing attorneys for legal aids across the state. We are in the process of hiring now for those who can hire. For some folks that, they're just moving existing people into those positions. So they're increasing the housing attorney, pool. but we still have to work to make sure people know about the availability of legal aid. And that is also a challenge. The
Mhm.
language barriers can be a
Mhm.
challenge. I'm really happy to report that both the full-time legal director of our eviction legal helpline is bilingual, speaks Spanish, and our paralegal is bilingual and speaks Spanish. So I think that's helpful. We also are available to do Zoom meetings like this for now, know your rights sessions with tenants anywhere and everywhere. So if any of you on the call are interested in, setting up know your rights for me to do with people in your community, or for, we are fortunate enough now to have, in addition to the attorney who runs the legal helpline, 2 other housing law attorneys at Virginia Poverty Law Center, and they're also available to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and put my email in the chat so that if you or somebody some other organization, anybody wants to set up a Zoom call sometime in the next few months for tenants or for service providers who work directly with tenants to go over all of these eviction prevention laws, we're more than happy to do that. We also have, let's see if I can get this right. We have a new website that I think is vplc.housing. I think this is right. But we have all of our housing materials on that website. And if I didn't put it in exactly correctly, if you just Google VPLC housing, you will come to a website that just talks about housing rights. And that's, certainly we have a lot of, just a lot of information on there that it's meant to be absorbed by folks who are tenants and who are facing these challenges. So, but yeah, it's a struggle to get the word out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I really enjoy this conversation.
I did as well. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And hopefully we will see you in Richmond one of these days.
Yes, hopefully in person, right?
Probably not during this session, but
not this session, but 2022, we can all meet in the hallway.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Have a great
Thank
night.
you.
So nice
Thank
talking to you. Thank
Right.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.